Right, we've got Anne Hooper coming on very soon, and she's written this book called Getting Your Children Through Divorce. Actually, she did the first version 30 years ago, but, you know, felt that things had changed so much in that time that there was a need to update it, which, you know, obviously it has. But, I mean, your dad left when you were very small, didn't you?
Yeah, I was very young. It was about 40 years ago now. I think I was about 4 at the time, yeah.
I mean, what do you remember of that? I mean, do you remember sort of being told and...
No, not very much. All I remember is, I remember upheaval. I remember, you know, arguments and fighting, and I remember this upheaval, moving from this sort of very big house that was, you know, quite expensive to a very, very dismal, dank, horrible grey house. It just seemed grey. But my mum never actually said anything to us, and the reason we knew, because I've been thinking about it since speaking about it earlier to you lot. I do remember my dad saying, "I'm not coming back," and I just remember being horribly confused by that. Why is he not coming back? You know, not particularly upset, but, you know, just a bit confused. And the other thing that really upset me at the time was seeing my mum cry, you know, when she didn't expect us to see her cry, and it was like, why is Mum upset? You know, and then sort of we just kind of got used to the idea of him not being there. It was a strange thing, but being so young. And I've asked my sister if she remembers any more, and she doesn't either. So there was never that official thing that you have now. I
mean, on reflection, do you think you needed that? Do you think that would have helped?
I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't think it's affected me that badly. I mean, obviously it does when you lose a parent when you're very young. But I think the thing that affected me the most was the stigma that was attached to kids in those days. You know, coming from a one-parent family, or a broken home, they used to call it.
Yeah.
And I remember we had to move schools and everything. We ended up in this new school, and it was like we were kind of branded as these kids that were from a broken home. And so, you know, every time something went wrong, we were the first to be suspected. It was that kind of thing. So that, you know, it did confuse me. And it wasn't until very much later, when we were about sort of 10, 11, that my mum did actually sit us down and explain to us what happened, you know, where my dad went and why we never ended up seeing him much.
Well, I suppose that is one of the things that has changed, that we're much more open with children now. I mean,
Yeah.
presumably,
More commonplace.
with you two, did you sit down and have the conversation, even though the kids were so young?
Yeah, well, Shane and Jake were 4 and 7, and I had to tell them. I hadn't told them for ages, because obviously me and Shane weren't arguing or anything in front of them, and everything seemed normal to them, but it was coming out in the papers the next day, so I had to go up and tell them, because I didn't want them to see it in the
So what was going to be in the papers?
All about what Shane had been up to, and it was all
so that he
splashed
was
over
going
the
off
paper.
with somebody
yeah,
else.
and so it was kind of like I didn't want them to open the paper, you know. So I had to go up and tell them, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
The shock must have been...
Just the shock. I think probably for them, because we hadn't been rowing, so they went from having 2 parents who seemed to love each other and get on, to Mum coming up and saying, actually, Mummy and Daddy are going to separate for a while. And you think you know your children, but Shane, who was 7, he was the laid-back one, and I thought he'll just go quiet, walk out the room and deal with it in his own little way, just curled up in this fetal position and absolutely sobbed and screamed for full-on an hour. And that really upset me, his reaction. And Jake was 4, so he just cried because Shane was crying, because he didn't have a clue what the hell was going on, to be honest with you. And then just cried because he wondered who was going to buy the DVDs at Christmas. You know what kids do, they're lovely like that. But, yeah, it really was the hardest thing I've ever done.
And David was 4, but Emily was much younger, wasn't she?
Yeah, David was 4, and Emily was only a year old when me and their dad split up, so she doesn't really remember much about it. But I think, even though he was only 4, it affected him in his little way, you know. I mean, like you say, to be honest, he was more bothered about, you know, the toys and bits and bobs, you know. But to be honest, it did affect him. And, you know, when we were by ourselves, I knew he was sad at times. There were times when he was sad. But I didn't actually go up to him and go, "Oh, are you sad about, you know, me and you?" I would say things to him like, you know, "Are you okay, darling? Is there anything that..."
See, that's the thing, I suppose, at age. I mean, how much do you go into it with them, like, you know, asking them to go over their feelings, or, I mean, even in terms of detail? I mean, you wanted to tell the boys before they'd hear it from gossip at school.
Yeah.
But do you tell them the detail of what's happened?
No, I didn't actually. I mean, I just told them that, you know, sometimes when adults get to a point where, you know, they don't want to be together anymore, maybe they don't love each other anymore, but we still loved them. I didn't say, Daddy's met some other person, and he's left your mother up the Swanee.
Do you think, I mean, looking back, I mean, in hindsight it's a great thing, but would you have done it any differently?
No, I think I would have been less... I protected them so much, I always have all the way through, to the point where I didn't tell them who was to blame at all, and so that it got to a point where Daddy was going up and up on a pedestal, and I was just the really miserable cow at the bottom. You know what I mean? Because I was the one that was upset, and Dad was just getting on with his life, and I wish I'd have not said, oh, Dad did this and Dad did that, but just explained a bit more that, you know, Dad has met someone else, and I'm not going to stay with him now because of that.
Oh, but that must be very difficult, shout, mustn't it?